بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجه الكريم. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue in our book Ahl Al-Sunna Al-Asha'ira. Ahl Al-Sunna, the Ash'aris. And when we say Ash'ari, you should know, as Imam Al-Haddad mentioned in his book of assistance in the section on doctrine. So you will find this reference in the book of assistance of Imam Al-Haddad in the chapter on doctrine. He mentioned Ahl Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah are the Ash'aris. Then when he finished talking about the Ash'aris, he said, the Maturidis are the same in all that we mention. So whenever we say Ash'ari, it is always entailed al-Maturidiyya. Despite the terminological differences between them in certain issues, whenever you say Ash'ari, Maturidis are intended in general. So this section deals with Al-Asha'ira wal-Maturidiyya hum ghalib al-Ummah. They are the vast scholars of this nation, meaning Al-Ummatul Muhammadiyya. We're on page 203, chapter number 10. Bismillah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Chapter 10. The Ash'aris and Maturidis are the majority of the Ummah. The senior Quranic exegetes of the Ummah from the Ash'aris and Maturidis. One of the sciences in which Ahl Al-Sunna have dominance and distinction is the exegesis of Allah Ta'ala's book and its ancillary sciences, such as the canonical modes of recitation, the rare and obscure words in the Quran, etc. A quick glance at the notables of the science will unveil this reality.
So here, the author is going to mention the major great scholars of tafsir of this nation. So when any of us who say we are Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah, we have recourse to certain explanations of the Quran that are well known among us. So when you're Sunni, like these are the books of tafsir for Ahl-Sunnah. When we examine those well-known books, we will find that the Akabir, that the great scholars who authored those books were Ash'aris and Maturidis. So the author now is going to talk in the different Islamic fields and sciences, the major foremost scholars in the field, to show that they were Ash'ari and Maturidi. All right, let us begin.
The esteemed Imam, Quranic exegete, and Hadith scholar Al-Qutubi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Jami lil-Ahkam al-Quran. His excellent exegesis is widely popular. In it, he narrates the views of all of the Salaf. Al-Dawoodi said about it in his Tabaqat, it is from the noblest of commentaries and one of the greatest of them in benefit.
All right, so let's take the one. This is Al-Jami'u li-Ahkam al-Quran, well known as Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Imam al-Qurtubi was Ash'ari and Maliki in fiqh. Note this, the most famous tafsir written that is well known among all Ahl-Sunnah that is referred to is Al-Jami li-Ahkam al-Quran lil-Imam al-Qurtubi, and he was Maliki, Ash'ari in creed, no doubt. So we had a discussion about Ash'aris and Malikis. Al-Qurtubi, his tafsir most famous, that is well spread among the people, Maliki, Ashari. And if you go to even the Wahhabiyya in their Tafsir Noble Quran, they put a summary of Tafsir al-Qurtubi, that Maliki Ashari, on the cover of their book. He was Ashari. That's one. Go ahead.
The Imam, Hadith Master, and Quranic Exegete, Abu al-Fida Ismail ibn Kathir. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim, al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, and others. It was mentioned that he explicitly said he was an Ash'ari. In addition to that, he was placed in charge of Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya, and one of the preconditions placed on it by the initial endowor was that only an Ash'ari can be placed in charge of it.
And
In
you can
addition,
find this in Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya by Imam al-Subki, Tajuddin al-Subki. Go ahead.
In addition to that, in his exegesis, there are declarations of divine transcendence and rebuke against those who take the outward meanings of the ambiguous text, as we mentioned regarding his explanation of Allah Ta'ala's words. Then he rose above the throne. There are other clear examples in his exegesis that show he was from Ahl Al-Sunna and Ash'ari.
Here, Ibn Kathir, one of the most famous tafsirs by Riwayah, he was Shafi'i and Ash'ari. And if you look on the front of the Noble Quran, it says a summary of Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir was Ash'ari, and he was Shafi'i. And despite being a student of Ibn Taymiyyah, he remained Ash'ari. And he explicitly mentioned that he was Ash'ari, as Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar Asqalani mentioned in his book, Ad-Durr al-Kamina. Now, and he was among the sheikhs of Dar al-Hadith Ashrafiyya in Damascus, which was the same school that Imam al-Nawawi and Ibn Salah was overtop. And the condition for that is that that person that leads that school to this day was Ash'ari.
The Imam, an esteemed Quranic exegete, the exemplar of all exegetes, Ibn Atiyah al-Andalusi.
Ibn Atiyah.
Ibn Atiyah, excuse me. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Tafsir al-Muharrar al-Wajiz. Al-Wajiz. Sorry. He wrote his exegesis in the best of ways. He was from the virtuous people of Ahl Al-Sunna wal Jama'ah and from the senior people of goodness. Abu Hayyan al-Andalusi said concerning him, he is the noblest of those who wrote in the science of Quranic exegesis and the best of those who took it upon themselves to examine it and record it.
Ibn Atiyah and Abu Hayyan al-Andalusi, all of them who were in Spain, also where Malikis were prevalent, and among some of them were Shafi'i, all of them were Ash'ari in creed. Of those great scholars there, the majority of them, should I say, were Ash'ari in creed. Now,
Imam Abu al-Hayyan al-Andalusi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Bahr al-Muhit wal-Nahr al-Mad min al-Bahr. He is the reliable proof and linguist and is in no need of introduction. And
yeah, you read his book, you know it, that he was a clear Ash'ari. His text is full of explanations and ta'wil of verses. No doubt about the Abu Hayyan kana Ash'ariyan, that he was Ash'ari. Go ahead.
The foremost Imam, Fakhruddin ad-Din al-Razi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Tafsir Mafatih al-Ghaib.
Which is one of the most extensive tafsir available, and that tafsir is full of issues of the creed. As he was mutakallim, he was a scholar of ilm al-kalam, Fakhruddin al-Razi, and he was 100 years after Imam al-Ghazali, and he was the Imam al-Ghazali of his time.
He was a Quranic exegete, a theologian, the Imam of his age, and an inimitable, one of his era. He was a thorn in the throats of the innovators and an unsheathed sword against the people of deviation and heresy.
And what Imam al-Faqruddin al-Razi, one time, the innovators, those Mushabbiha in his time, they put all around the masjid things about his wife. He ascended the mimbar. He said, they said this about my wife. They said this, they said this. But one thing they didn't say is that my wife likens Allah to his creation. SubhanAllah. Now, go ahead.
The Imam, Quranic exegete, Hadith master, and reviver of the Sunnah, Al-Baghawi,
Al-Baghawi, yes.
Al-Baghawi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of the book Ahl Al-Sunna. His exegesis is filled with that which proves the doctrine of Ahl Al-Sunna, and it is filled with the Sunni figurative interpretation of the ambiguous text.
Al-Baghawi and Shahr al-Sunnah is a huge encyclopedia of hadith of the Prophet, and his books, Tafsir al-Baghawi, which was one of the famous books of Imam Haddad. He was Shafi'i and Ash'ari. Go ahead.
The Imam and Quranic exegete, Abu al-Layth as-Samarqandi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Bahr al-Ulum, Tanbi al-Ghafilin, and Bustan al-Arifin. He was given the nickname of Imam of Guidance.
And his books are famous, well known. He was among the Ash'a'ira. Go ahead.
The Imam and Quranic exegete, al-Wahidi, Abu al-Hasan Ali
Al-Wahidi.
al-Wahidi, Abu al-Hasan Ali al-Naysaburi. He was the chief scholar of his time in grammar and Quranic exegesis. He was a Sunni Ash'ari from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. He is the author of many beneficial works and splendid allusions. He has a book on the circumstances behind revelation, Asbab al-Nuzul, and it is one of the most famous books on the topic.
And Al-Wahidi, he wrote 3 books in Al-Tafsir, Al-Basit, Al-Wasit, and Al-Wajiz. Imam al-Ghazali was so in love with the works of Imam al-Wahidi in Tafsir, he wrote 3 books in fiqh and named them after Al-Wahidi's book. He wrote Al-Basit, Al-Wasit, and Al-Wajiz fi fiqh al-Shafi'i, after the works in Tafsir of Imam al-Wahidi. And he was a well-known great Ash'ari scholar. Now,
the Imam and Quranic exegete, Abu al-Thana Shihab ad-Din I'm so sorry. Al-Alusi al-Husseini al-Hassani. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He was the seal of the Quranic exegetes and the cream of the Hadith scholars, as described by Sheikh Bahja al-Baytar. He also said about him, he, radiallahu anhu, was one of the unique ones of the world. He would speak the truth and would never swerve from veracity. He used to cling firmly to the Sunnah and keep away from tribulations.
In his famous book, Ruh al-Ma'ani in At-Tafsir, Kana Ash'ariyan, he was Ash'ari.
The Imam and Quranic exegete, Amin al-Halabi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Ad-Dur al-Masun.
And he is also the famous author of the book of Sirah, As-Siratul Halabiyya. He was Ash'ari, MashaAllah.
The Hadith master and Quranic
And what is unique about his tafsir, it is very strong in Arabic grammar. And when it gets to verses, it explains them, even the understanding properly according to the Arabic language, which is very significant.
The Hadith master and Quranic exegete, Jalal ad-Din as-Suyuti, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Dur al-Manthur fi al-Tafsir bil-Mathur.
And as-Suyuti, he wrote over 600 books. And he is the famous in Tafsir and in Hadith, his famous book, which is the most important book for advanced studies in the science of Hadith, Tadrib al-Rawi. And he wrote Jami al-Saghir and other books in Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He was one of the foremost scholars after Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Uh, he was Ashari, Shafi'i. Nam,
The Imam al-Khatib al-Shirbini, may Allah
Ashirbi.
Ta'ala, Shirbini, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Siraj Munir.
Munir, which is a 4-volume tafsir. Imam al-Shirbini not only was a great scholar of tafsir and of Arabic language, he also was one of the major scholars of the latter Shafi'i school. And his book, most famous book in that, is Mughni al-Muhtaj, Bisharh al-Minhaj, which is an explanation of Minhaj al-Talibin by Imam al-Nawawi. And he also has a recently published book uh, and an explanation of a Tanbih by Imam al-Shirazi. Now,
There are many other Quranic exegetes who were from Ahl Al-Sunna, Asharis or Maturidis. Were we
here,
to
after mention and to show you, all these books are present and available. We can use them as resources right away to show these points. And all those verses, we can go to those books of tafsir and present them as they are. And this is important. So it's not just the claim that's in the book. We can actually go to the actual books and check it to make sure that what is being said is true. And you will find in those books either a tafweed or ta'wil. You will find none of the ideas of al-mushabbiyah and al-mujassima. Now,
were we to mention all of them, it would take us away from the goal of this book. Notice, we have only mentioned those who came after Imam al-Ashari and followed his way, and we did not mention the Sheikh and head of the Quranic exegetes, the Hadith master and exegete Muhammad ibn Jarir at-Tabari.
and,
May
and
Allah.
we mentioned a Tabari already in many of his ta'wilat. So he was before Ashari. We're talking about after Ashari. If we're talking about Imam al-Tabari, who died in the year 310, he was in the same time of an Imam Ashari in the east, while Imam Ashari was in Baghdad. And the conclusion of their explanations of these verses are the same. Now,
May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He was a contemporary of Imam al-Ashari and died before him. So it is not far-fetched to imagine that he came across some of the many written works of Imam al-Ashari and benefited from them, especially considering the fact that they lived in the same city. Whoever looks deeply into the exegesis of Imam at-Tabari will see that this is not far-fetched. It is authentically reported from him that he engaged in some figurative interpretation for some of the ambiguous verses, and he cited some of the interpretations of the Salaf among the companions and followers and supported them. Moreover, it is not far-fetched to imagine that he might have ascribed himself to al-Ashari, and that which has not reached us of his books. The books of history mention that all of Ahl Al-Sunna in the Islamic world came to the aid and defense of Imam Abu al-Hasan and Imam Abu al-Mansur. Perhaps the position taken by some bigoted Hanbalis against Ibn Jarir strengthens this assumption.
mhm.
No matter the case, it is enough for us that he was in agreement with the doctrine of declaring Allah Ta'ala's transcendence, and that is enough for us to consider Imam al-Tabari, among the aforementioned Quranic exegetes. Nay, he is at their forefront. What matters is the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, whether one ascribes to al-Ashari or not. Some of the latter-day Ashari Quranic exegetes. The Sheikh and caller, Sayyid Qutb, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of the tremendous book, Bilal al-Quran.
And even though Ibn Sayyid Qutb had some extremist positions related to rulership in his book, as for him, it is well known that most of them were Ash'ari from Hassan Banna and those who followed his movement. Mm.
The Sheikh and erudite scholar At-Tahir ibn Ashur. He is the author of the tremendous exegesis At-Tahrir wa Tanwir.
And he was among the most famous Maliki scholars in the recent times, and he was Ash'ari. And his books point to it explicitly. And he was the leader of the Malikis in tafsir of the Quran.
The Ustad and caller Sheikh Saeed
I
Hawa.
suppose we should leave all of those and just go to the likes of what we talk about. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Mm.
Sheikh Saeed Hawa, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Asas fi at-Tafsir.
Mhm.
The Sheikh and erudite scholar Muhammad Mutawali Ash-Sharawi, may Allah,
Sha'ran. Mhm.
Sharawi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, whose name has become connected with the Quran so much that when the Quran is mentioned, the Sheikh is mentioned, and when the Sheikh is mentioned, the Quran is mentioned.
And he was the great Egyptian scholar. Mm.
The Sheikh and Professor Wahba al-Zuhaili, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Tafsir al-Munir, Al-Fiqh al-Islami, and other useful works.
And he was Ash'ari, he is Ash'ari and from Damascus, among the famous great scholars of Damascus. Now, so this is for tafsir, right? And when we want to understand the Quran, we have recourse to the books of tafsir, and you will find these things abundant of a ta'wil and a tafweed in those books. Now, let's move to the great scholars of hadith who were hufaz, those who remembered over 100,000 hadith with their chains of narration, who were asharis. Now, go ahead.
The senior hadith scholars and masters of the Ummah from the Asharis and Maturidis.
Mhm.
The Imam and Hadith master Abu al-Hasan ad-Daraqutni,
Mhm.
may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He was the Imam of his era, and he did not narrate to anyone of his likes. His story with Imam al-Baqillani is enough to establish that he followed the way of al-Ashari.
Daraqutni was Shafi'i, and Imam al-Baqillani was the leading Maliki scholar, Ash'ari scholar in his time, al-Baqillani, who was well known for his defense of the creed of the Ash'ari. Now,
The Hadith master Abu Nuaym al-Ashfahani, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Hilya al-Awliya and was from the second rank of al-Ashri's followers. He was from the rank of Imam al-Baqillani, Ustad Abu Ishaq al-Isfarayini, al-Hakim, and Ibn Furak. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon them all.
and here, Abu Nu'aym al-Asbahani, his book, Hilyat al-Awliya, is a book of hadith that talks about the tasawwuf of the companions and all of the great scholars up to his time. So he was a hafiz of hadith, Ash'ari, Shafi'i, and Sufi. Mm.
The Hadith master Abu Dhar al-Harawi, Abdullah ibn Ahmed, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. Al-Hafiz ibn Asakir counted him among the third rank, from those who took from the companions of al-Ashari's companions.
Mm.
The Hadith master Abu Tahir as-Silafi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. The Hadith master Al-Hakim al-Naysaburi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Mustadrak ala as-Sahihain,
Al-Mustadrak al-Sahihain, which is a book where he mentioned the hadith that are authentic according to the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim that were not mentioned in their books. MashaAllah.
He was the Imam of the traditionalist, Ahl al-Hadith, in his time, and he is in no need of introduction. The scholars are in agreement that he was one of the most knowledgeable Imams by whom Allah Ta'ala protected this religion. Al-Hafid ibn Asakir mentioned him among the second rank, from the companions of those who took directly from Al-Ashari.
And he was, and he was the Sheikh of Imam al-Bayhaqi, al-Hakim. And he was among the first to write in the science of hadith. He has a book, Ma'rifatu Ulum al-Hadith. Now,
The Hadith master, Ibn Hibban al-Busti,
Ibn Hibban.
Hibban, al-Busti. May
Yeah, the
Allah Ta'ala,
author of Sahih ibn Hibban.
may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Sahih ibn Hibban, Kitab at-Thiqat, and others. He is the reliable Imam and the exemplar of his time who was at the forefront. His Sahih collection is the best testimony to that. The Hadith master, Abu Sa'd ibn As-Sam'ani, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Al-Ansab. The Imam and Hadith master, Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of many works that have spread around the world entire and that are considered well pleasing to friend and foe alike.
And among the most important books to show his methodology as an Ash'ari scholar is his book Al-Asma wa Sifat, the names and attributes.
The Imam and Hadith master, Ibn Asakir, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of Tariq Damashq, an encyclopedic book in which he left nothing too small or great without mention.
And Ibn Asakir wrote an entire book, Tabyin Kadhib al-Muftari, in which he defended Imam al-Ash'ari and the Ash'ari schools, and he mentioned the Ash'ari school, and he mentioned of all the great scholars of the Ash'ari up to his time in the 6th century.
The Imam and
ocean in hadith knowledge.
The Imam and Hadith master, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi.
Al-Khatib.
Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. Al-Hafiz ibn Asakir mentioned him among the first of the fourth rank.
And if you want to know the rank of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, all of the scholars who wrote in the science of hadith are dependent on the works of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. He was the one who laid out the foundations for the knowledge of hadith among the scholars. And all the great scholars who wrote in that subject, like Ibn Salah, like An-Nawawi, like As-Suyuti, like Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar Asqalani, like Al-Iraqi, like Badruddin ibn Jama'ah, and all of the great scholars, all of them relied upon the books of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, who was Shafi'i and Ash'ari.
The Imam and Hadith master, Muhi ad-Din Yahya ibn Sharaf ad-Din an-Nawawi. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of many books for which Allah Ta'ala has placed acceptance in the world among people.
And all of us know Imam an-Nawawi. We don't even need to talk about that. The fact that Imam an-Nawawi was Ash'ari and his rank among the Muslims really closed the conversation. But just to make it known, go ahead.
The Imam and verifier, the remnant of the earlier Hadith master, Salah ad-Din Khalil ibn Khilkuldi al-Ala'i. He did not leave anyone after him as strong as him in hadith, and he had no contemporary who could outmatch him in it.
And they said Al-Ala'i and Ad-Daraqutni was of this high rank, right? That like scholars of hadith, these are the masters.
The Sheikh of Islam and Hadith master, Abu Amr ibn as-Salah, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He was the first person placed in charge of Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya, in which it was stipulated that only an Ashari could take charge of it.
And Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya is where all of those great scholars of hadith in Damascus were, including our teachers who were the heads of Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in our time. May Allah reward them on what we benefited from them. However, Ibn Salah in the science of hadith is the standard. And his works, Al-Muqaddimah Ibn Salah in the science of hadith, all the books after that, whether they were poems, whether they were explanations, were all based on his book.
The Imam and Hadith master, Ibn Abi Jamrah al-Andalusi, the master narrator
Al-Ash'ari.
The master narrator of the Maghrib, May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him and be pleased with him. He is the author of the book Bahja an-Nufus bi Sharh Mia Hadith min Sahih al-Bukhari,
which is one of the most excellent spiritual commentaries on Sahih Bukhari you would ever want to read. He's buried in Egypt. Subhanallah, Ibn Abi Jamra. MashaAllah. Naam. Kana Ash'ariyan. He was Ash'ari.
The Imam and Hadith Master Al-Kirmani Shams ad-Din Muhammad ibn Yusuf. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him and be pleased with him. He is the author of the well-known commentary of Sahih al-Bukhari.
And he was before Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Naam.
The Imam and Hadith Master Al-Mundhiri. May Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of At-Targhib wal-Tarhib.
And all of these are the foremost scholars of Hadith. And their books are the main references when one wants to study Hadith. Naam.
The Imam and Hadith Master Al-Ubbi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of a commentary on Sahih Muslim. The Imam and Hadith Master Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him. He is the author of the greatest commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari, Fatul Bari. Due to its high rank and general benefit, it has been said there is no migration after the Fath.
And he reached the level of title Amir al-Mu'mineen fil Hadith, the commander of the faithful in Hadith. Whenever he's such a rank that you don't even need to say his name, just say Al-Hafiz, and that's it. It's known that's Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. And all of those who talk about Sahih and Da'if and Hassan and all that Hadith, their reliance is on his books. And he was Ash'ari and Shafi'i and Sufi. Now,
the Imam and Hadith Master As-Sakhawi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him,
who was the main student of Al-Hafiz ibn Hajar. He was Ash'ari as well.
The Imam and Hadith Master As-Suyuti, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him,
which we already mentioned when we talked about his tafsir. In Hadith, he is the famous author of Al-Jami al-Saghir and Tadrib al-Rawi in the science of Hadith, which is the most important book in the sciences of Hadith available in print.
Imam al-Qastalani, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, a commenter, on Sahih Bukhari. The Imam and Hadith Master Al-Munawi, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him,
who wrote the famous commentary on As-Suyuti's Jami al-Saghir. Naam.
There are many other Imams and Hadith Masters of the Ummah that were from Ahl Al-Sunna, the Asharis and Maturidis. Imam Taj ad-Din as-Subki, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy upon him, said,
who was the chief judge after his father in Sham and Egypt.
And the doctrine of Al-Ashari, was the doctrine of the Hadith scholars then and now.
In our way, if we was to have a versus of just pray your scholars, and you would see as going in tafsir and in hadith, talking about the Quran and the Sunnah, the foremost scholars in both of those fields were Ash'aris. If we open a book that we're going to read, that we're going to rely upon, and talking about the Quran or the Sunnah, we're going to be talking about the books written by the Ash'ari. After you mention all these scholars, what's left, right? It's like these, as some of the scholars said, when you talk on this subject, it's like dwarfs challenging giants. And I would rather say dwarfs challenging mountains. Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah, all of this. And one of the things what I would like to do in the future, inshallah, is to go through these books and show you in each of those books where they made ta'wil and where they explained these ayat away from their apparent meaning that is impermissible to attribute to Allah. Then you will see that this is not something that we debating about. This is just facts, right? You can't deny it. The books are published. The books are available. We have unbroken chains of narration, which we can produce back to those books through our teachers. No problem. Not a hard job. But this is for what? To show us our religion. Our religion is so precise when we understand it. It is so precise, so laid out when you understand it. May Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala bless us, inshallah ta'ala, tomorrow. Are we moving? Tomorrow we'll come back and we'll talk about the scholars of fiqh. We'll talk about the scholars of Arabic language, the scholars of the prophetic biography, on and on and on and on. If there are any quick questions, please feel free to ask. We stop at page 210, right?
Correct.
Any questions? I don't know if there's any questions after all that, right? Nothing should be left. And think about it. Really what it breaks down to, honestly, it's like saying our scholars and the ones who we rely upon our religion were ignorant. And they didn't know their Lord. And they're what we rely on to learn our religion. They are the foremost authorities and references in the fields. They didn't know what was the correct belief. Yet all of them had the same belief. And they were confused. And it's important that we learn these things so we don't have to point to ourselves, right? There is no need to us to say where we're upon. Forget what we're upon. What was the scholars of this religion? Who are the experts? Who are the authorities? What were they upon? That's more important. And they all had these chains of narrations and connections, right? It's not hard to trace all this stuff. Very easy. When we have access, let's keep it fair. We have to have access. And one of the things that we hope to do is to give you access. Because we deserve it. We have to pass the religion to our children. We need access. We need passcodes. We need the keys. Can't wait for everyone to open the door for us. We got to get access ourselves. Tell you, inshallah, we'll see you in the morning for post scattered thoughts and post Fajr reflections. I don't know if we're going to be reading the Arabic Nawawi this tomorrow morning, so I think we'll be in scattered thoughts. Inshallah, Brother Abdul Rahim, we got to do our part. We have to learn and we have to convey. Oh, tonight is Friday. Yes, in 40 minutes, Sheikh Walid Rifai, thank you, Malika, I forgot. We'll continue with the 40 hadith of An-Nawawi, inshallah. Please join in at 8 o'clock. Barakallahu bikum. Please make dua for our reader, for patiently working with us and supporting our efforts and making it easy for us to just explain while she takes care of the bulk of the reading. She does most of the heavy lifting. So we should keep her in our du'as to ask Allah to reward her and raise her rank, inshallah. Tayyib, barakallahu bikum. We'll see you tomorrow morning, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.